the city hums with life, its streets bustling with the usual mix of chatter, honking horns, and the steady rhythm of hurried footsteps. But as dusk settles over the skyline, there's a certain quiet exhaustion that hangs in the air, like the city is letting out a collective sigh after a long day. To those who've lived in this pulse, it's a familiar feeling, a blend of survival and routine. Among the evening crowd there's Ava, a black woman in her mid-30s, wearing the tired look of someone who spent her day carrying the weight of other people's struggles. As a social worker, she spent hours navigating the complicated webs of people's lives, offering help where she can, her heart full of empathy but her body running on fumes. Today, though, there's a different kind of weight on her shoulders. Bills are overdue, the fridge is nearly empty, and the paycheck she's been counting on is still days away. She walks down the sidewalk, the familiar rhythm of her steps echoing in the quiet streets, when something catches her eye, a small scuffed leather wallet lying by the crosswalk. It's so out of place in the midst of the polished world around her. Ava slows her pace, bending down to pick it up. The leather is worn, the edges frayed, but inside her fingers brush against something that feels heavier than she expected. Cash. Thick, crisp bills that immediately set her heart racing. There are also a few credit cards and a weather did. For a moment, Ava just stares at the wallet, the weight of it not just in her hands but in her chest, pressing on her conscience. It's too much money, more than she's seen in weeks, maybe even months. The temptation stirs inside her. The bills are piling up, her account running low, and this could solve so many of her problems, just like that. But as quickly as the thought rises, it's replaced with a deep, uneasy tug. She knows what's right. But sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel so easy when survival is on the line. So with a heavy sigh, Ava stands up, the wallet still in her hands. She feels the pull of her own financial struggle, of the burden she's carried so long. But she knows, deep down, the choice she'll have to make. Standing on the sidewalk, Ava feels the weight of the wallet in her hands. Its contents a stark reminder of everything she's up against. The bills are tempting, so much money, enough to make her forget for a moment the looming pressure of overdue bills, the constant worry about where the next paycheck is coming from. Her mind races through 1,000 possibilities, all of them easier than the one thing she knows she has to do. Her heart beats faster as the thoughts whirl inside her head, each one battling the other for control. Just take it, a voice whispers. No one will ever know. It's yours now. But another voice, softer, quieter, counsels her against it. What if someone needs this? What if they're struggling just like you? It's the kind of moment where time seems to stretch, and the weight of a single choice can feel like it will define everything that comes after. Ava's grip tightens around the wallet, and for a brief second she wonders if she can just walk away, just keep the money. But then a memory comes flooding back, unbidden. She's a little girl again in her mother's small kitchen, the smell of stew wafting through the air. Her mother, strong and unyielding, standing at the counter with a pile of bills and a head full of worries. She remembers the look in her eyes as she spoke. Ava, life's going to throw a lot at you. You'll face temptation, sure as the sun sets. But you remember this. No matter how hard it gets, don't lose yourself. You keep your integrity. You help when you can, and you don't take what doesn't belong to you. The words echo in Ava's mind, their weight heavier now than any bill or overdue payment. Her mother's voice, still steady even in the hardest of times. You live right even when it's hard. That's how we survive, baby. By sticking together. By being the good we want to see. Ava stands there for a long moment, the chaos of her thoughts quieting as her mother's lessons settle in her chest. She closes her eyes, takes a deep breath, and with a final resolute decision, she slips the wallet back into her bag. It won't be easy. She doesn't know how she'll make it through another month of struggle, or how she'll explain to her daughter that sometimes the weight of doing right can feel just as heavy as the weight of doing wrong. But in her heart, Ava knows she's made the only choice that matters, the choice that will keep her and the world around her whole. The next day, Ava sets off with the wallet in hand, her steps deliberate, but there's a heaviness in her chest she can't quite shake. It's not just the act of returning the money, it's the uncertainty of what she'll find, who she'll be handing it over to. The address on the ID takes her out of the heart of the city and into the shadowed fringes where things aren't as polished, where the cracks in society feel just a little more visible. She arrives at a rundown shelter on the edge of town. The building, old and crumbling, seems to sag under the weight of its own history. The paint is peeling, windows boarded up, and a general sense of neglect hangs in the air. It's not the kind of place that stands out in a city used to its own brand of urban decay. This is where people come when they've been forgotten, pushed to the margins where survival is the only thing left to fight for. Eva approaches the door and knocks. After a few moments, the door creaks open, revealing Joe, an older, white man, perhaps in his 60s. His face is rough, unshaven, and his clothes are threadbare, the fabric hanging loosely from his frail frame. But despite his disheveled appearance, there's something in his eyes that catches Eva off guard, an old, deep spark of awareness. It's the look of someone who's seen far too much, yet still refuses to let life chip away every ounce of their humanity. Joe takes a moment to take in Ava's face, then looks down at the wallet she's holding out, his expression unreadable. He doesn't seem shocked, doesn't flinch in surprise, just a quiet sigh, a mix of relief and something else, something that feels like resignation. His hands tremble slightly as he takes the wallet from her. "Thank you," he says, his voice hoarse but steady. "I didn't think anyone would find it." Eva watches him for a second longer, a strange pang of empathy rising in her chest. There's no arrogance, no pride in his demeanor, just an exhaustion that comes from having lived through too many lost chances, too many setbacks. But there's also something else, something beneath the surface that Eva can't quite name yet. "I didn't expect to find it either," she replies, her voice softening. "I just wanted to return it." Joe nods, his eyes briefly flicking to the cash inside before quickly looking away. He doesn't seem like the type to be overwhelmed by such things, but Ava can see the way he holds the wallet like it's something precious, like it could be the last thing he'll ever own. Then his voice drops lower, the kind of honesty that only comes when someone's been stripped of all pretense. The money, it was meant for rent and food. I had just gotten some help from a charity, but it wasn't enough. That wallet, it was all I had left. Eva stands there, struck by his words. For a moment she can't think of anything to say. There's a quiet vulnerability in his tone, in the way he doesn't try to sugarcoat things or make excuses. Joe doesn't want sympathy. He just wants to survive, to hang on for just a little longer. This isn't just about a wallet. This is about the fragile, desperate hope that comes when you've been on the edge for far too long. "I've been living on the streets for a while now," Joe continues, the words coming slowly, like he's trying to piece together a story he doesn't want to tell. It's hard to stay off them. You do what you can, try to make it through another day, another week. There's a weight in his words, an unspoken truth that hangs between them. Ava doesn't just see a homeless man standing in front of her. She sees someone who has fought for every ounce of survival, just like she does. Someone who has faced the same struggle for dignity and respect, even when life has tried to tear it all away. Ava's heart shifts in that moment. She's been holding on to her own struggles, her own weight of responsibility and financial burden. But looking at Joe, she's hit with a realization that stirs her deep. She's never been so far gone, so desperate that she had to rely on the kindness of strangers just to keep going. And yet she sees in him something familiar, a reflection of the fight she faces every day. The silence between them stretches on, heavy with shared understanding. Ava doesn't know what to say, but she knows this man's life isn't just about the money. It's about survival. And in that moment she realizes that Joe, in his vulnerability, has shared more than just his struggles. He's shared his humanity. The air between them shifts, as if Joe has gathered the courage to speak the things he's been holding back for so long. His hands tremble slightly as he adjusts the wallet in his grasp, as though it were something too fragile to touch with rough fingers. For a moment there's an uneasy silence. Ava can feel the weight of his unspoken history pressing against her, and she waits, sensing that he has more to say. I didn't always end up like this, Joe starts, his voice a little softer now, as though he's peeling back the layers of a life he'd long kept hidden. I used to have a job, worked in a factory. That's how I made my living, how I had a life. I had a family too, my wife, my daughter. Everything was fine. I thought it'd always be fine. Ava listens closely, her attention never wavering as Joe's words tumble out. It's raw, real, and not at all what she expected. But things change, don't they? Joe continues, a slight bitterness creeping into his voice. I lost my job. Just like that. A new guy came in, younger, faster, cheaper. They let me go, and I didn't know how to deal with it, so I turned to drink. It helped me forget for a while, but it only made things worse. My wife left me, took my daughter. She couldn't watch me throw everything away. Ava's heart tightens at the admission, the weight of his pain evident in every word. He's not looking for sympathy. He's just telling the truth, as painful as it is. I didn't mean for it to happen, Joe adds, his voice cracking now, the hard edge of his life falling away to reveal something softer, more vulnerable. But I lost everything. And now here I am. There's a deep, heavy pause between them, as if Joe has finally let all the ghosts of his past stand in the room with them. Ava is quiet, her own thoughts swirling as she reflects on his words. She's heard this story before. Perhaps not in these exact details, but in the way that life can unravel so suddenly, so violently, that you don't even recognize yourself when you look in the mirror anymore. Her mind drifts back to her own family, to the struggles they faced growing up. Her mother's constant hustle to make ends meet, to keep food on the table, even when it seemed like there was nothing left to give. The weight of poverty had always been an undercurrent in Ava's life, something that shaped her, molded her, even when she tried to escape it. It's not the same story, not exactly, but the threads of hardship, of survival against all odds, bind their experiences together. Joe's story hits closer to home than she expected. She sees, perhaps for the first time, that no one's pain is ever really theirs alone. Life doesn't just throw misfortune at the weak. It throws it at everyone, regardless of where you start. And sometimes the fight to stay afloat doesn't look like anything you've been taught to expect. Joe's voice brings her back to the present. He's staring at the floor now, his words coming slower, as if he's finally gathered the strength to share the last part of his story. I've been trying to get in touch with my daughter, he says, his voice thick with emotion. I've been trying for years, but she won't talk to me. She's angry. I don't blame her. I left her with a mother who was too busy to deal with me, and now I'm the man she doesn't know, the man she never wanted to know. Ava's chest tightens as Joe looks up at her, his eyes suddenly vulnerable, raw. The money. He pauses, clearing his throat. The money wasn't just for rent or food. I was going to send her a gift. Something simple. I thought maybe if she saw I was trying, if she knew I was still here, maybe she'd forgive me. Maybe she'd talk to me again. The words land in Ava's chest like a punch. She's caught off guard, unsure of how to respond. This wasn't just money for survival. It wasn't just the difference between sleeping indoors or on the streets. For Joe, this was his chance for redemption, for healing a broken relationship. This wallet, this find, it was more than just cash. It was his hope, wrapped in the form of a gift he could never afford on his own. Ava takes a step back, her heart heavy with the gravity of what she's just learned. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Joe to share such a personal, vulnerable piece of his life. In that moment, the man standing in front of her is no longer just a figure of pity. He's a father, a man trying to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by his own choices, someone who's just trying to find a way back to the people he's lost. Since Joe's words linger in the air, something shifts in Ava. She's still standing there, the weight of his story pressing into her, but now her perspective is starting to change. What she initially saw as just a simple encounter, a find, a return, a good deed, is no longer that clear-cut. As the layers of Joe's life unfold before her, Ava begins to see that what he needs isn't just the money. It's something far more profound. It's not about survival anymore. It's about connection, about being seen. She looks at him differently now. Joe is no longer just a man who's lost everything, a person reduced to the streets and his struggles. He's a human being, someone who, despite his mistakes, despite the years of addiction and pain, is still searching for redemption, for a way back to the life he once had. A life that seems just out of reach. And Ava, in that moment, realizes that maybe she can offer him more than the money. She can offer him a chance to be seen, to be heard. She takes a deep breath, the words coming more easily now, as if she's found something inside her that she didn't know was there. "Joe," she begins, her voice steady and sure, "I can't promise you that things will change overnight, but what I can do is help you get back on your feet. I can connect you with some resources, addiction recovery programs, housing assistance, even a food pantry." Joe looks up at her, his weary eyes clouded with skepticism. It's a familiar look, the kind of look that comes from too many false promises, too many people who've said they'd help and then disappeared, leaving him with nothing but broken hope. His lips twitch in a half-smile, almost like he's trying to hold back a bitter laugh. "I've heard it all before," he mutters, his voice tinged with both weariness and disbelief. "People come, they talk about help, about turning things around, but none of it sticks. It's just the system, you know, always promising, never delivering." Ava can see the doubt in his eyes, the layers of disappointment that have built up over the years. She doesn't blame him for feeling this way. She knows how the system can fail people, how many times the world can let you down before you stop believing anything will ever change. But there's something about Joe, something in the way he shared his story so openly, so vulnerably, that makes Ava feel like she has to try, like she has to be the one who doesn't walk away. "I know you've been let down before," she says gently, her voice softening as she takes a step closer. "But I'm not like those people, Joe. I'm not just here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to help, and I mean it. I'll help you with the paperwork, get your ID and documents in order, whatever it takes. I'll make sure you're not doing this alone." There's a long pause as Joe stares at her, searching her face for something, anything, that might reveal her true intentions. Ava doesn't look away. She doesn't flinch or back down. She holds his gaze, her eyes steady with the sincerity of her promise. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, Joe sighs, his shoulders slumping, as if the weight of his years is too much to carry anymore. He looks at Ava, a trace of something close to hope flickering in his tired eyes. "You really think I can change?" he asks, his voice almost too quiet. Ava smiles, the warmth of her gesture reaching into the spaces between them. "I don't think I can change you, Joe," she replies softly, "but I think you've still got a chance, and if you let me, I'll walk with you through it." Joe's expression softens. The hardened, cynical edge in his face starts to melt away, just a little, and in its place is something raw, vulnerable but willing. "I don't know if I'm ready," he says, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I'll give it a shot." In that moment, Ava realizes something. It wasn't the money that Joe needed, not really. What he needed was someone to see him, someone who didn't just view him as another lost soul in the system. He needed someone to believe that, despite everything, there was still a way forward. Ava nods, feeling a sense of quiet triumph that's not about winning or fixing things, but about the power of human connection. She extends her hand to Joe, and for the first time since they met, he accepts it. Not with hesitation, but with the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Ava walks away from the shelter, her steps lighter than when she arrived. There's a feeling in her chest, something she didn't expect to experience, an unexpected lightness, a sense of peace that settles into her bones. She didn't just return a wallet today. She didn't just give back money or a piece of someone's life. She gave Joe something far more valuable. She gave him a glimpse of hope, the possibility that things could change, that he didn't have to be defined by his past. And somehow, that feels like more of a gift than any amount of cash ever could. She walks through the city. The streets don't seem quite as noisy. The lights aren't as harsh. The buildings, the people, the movement, they all feel a little more connected now. It's as if her small act of compassion has woven a thread between herself and the rest of the world, tying her to everyone she passes, reminding her that we're all just one decision away from a different life. Ava's mind drifts to Joe's face, to the way his hardened exterior softened when she offered her help, the uncertainty in his eyes as he decided to trust her, even just a little. It strikes her that life is fragile, fleeting. A single decision, a single encounter, can change the course of someone's life, sometimes for the better, sometimes for worse. But today it felt like she made a difference, even if it was just in one small, broken man's life. And maybe that's all anyone can do. Offer a moment of connection, a moment of grace in the middle of all the chaos. By the time she reaches her apartment, Ava's mind has already moved beyond the encounter. But as she walks through the door, a familiar feeling wraps around her. It's the sound of her daughter's laughter, the warmth of her home, small, everyday blessings that Ava sometimes forgets to appreciate. Without thinking, she drops her bag, takes off her shoes, and crosses the room to her daughter, who's sitting at the kitchen table scribbling away on some drawing. Ava scoops her up into a tight hug, holding her close for a moment longer than usual, feeling the weight of the day's lesson settle in her chest. She closes her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, but it's not a tear of sadness. It's a tear of gratitude for the things she has, for the family she's built, for the simple joys of the everyday moments she sometimes takes for granted. The world feels a little more connected now, a little more full of possibility, as if every person she meets has a story that could change hers. She squeezes her daughter a little tighter, whispering softly, "I love you." And for the first time in a while, she feels like everything is going to be okay. It's not about the money we find, but the lives we touch and the grace we give.